All right, party people in the place to be. It is once again the Avengers Forever podcast. And if you're hearing this, Jed McKay's Avengers run has officially ended. I'm hoping we can get some news, maybe, maybe not. But we have a very special guest. If you've watched any of our interviews, his name gets brought up in every single interview we have ever done here. He is the longest running editor at Marvel, Mr. Tom Brevoort.
Yay, Tom!
Hello.
Oh,
Welcome. Thanks for being
Thanks.
with us.
Thanks for having me.
I have a follow-up question about that spinner rack. Is that
Sure.
is that one of the ones that, like, because I know that when you started collecting, I was reading about that your dad kind of enabled your initial
Yep.
collecting bug when you were little.
Yep.
My dad too, and your story sounded very, very similar to my story. With your dad going in for smokes and coming
Yep.
out with comics.
Yep.
And the spinner rack is very nostalgic for me because that's where I first started seeing Marvels and DCs on the spinner racks, and where I actually bought my first comic was off a spinner rack at the
Yep.
convenience store.
Me as well, as I think you know.
Yeah, yeah. It was no a great story, and your collecting habit when it started was very, very, like, a very, very similar to mine and probably a lot of other people, you know. So
That's how we did it back in the 70s.
for sure, for sure. So so I guess my first question, and Mike, I know, Mike, jump in when you have
Yep.
a question, or else this is going to be a 3 hour Bud asks tons of questions about this. What you started like an internship in like 1989 at
Yes.
Marvel, is that right? So tell me, what, like, you've been there this whole time. Is there a reason for your longevity at Marvel? Or what?
Well, I'm kind of like a barnacle. I'm kind of like a mold. It's hard to get rid of me. Again, that's all I can really tell you in terms of my longevity. I've been fortunate. I've been lucky. I've been in the right place at the right time. I've been just good enough and just enough of a survivor to survive a lot of things. But I don't know if there's any specific like secret to it. I don't have secret footage of all of Marvel's owners, doing horrendous things or anything that I could use. It's purely luck of the draw.
Wow. No, to me, um, because being a fan that long, and I'm like one of those people that has never kind of migrated away from comics at any given time. I've just
Yep.
always been there, and just having your name be kind of synonymous, especially with our website Avengers Forever that we do, and you've been there since, I mean, the Busiek run, right? It
That was when
was
I started on Avengers. Yeah.
right, and you were there just forever, and so many different things that you've seen, through volume 3 of the Avengers, and it's disassembled, and all the different events in Civil War has just translated so much into how we all have grown up loving the Avengers, and to have someone there. I think my only other comparison really was Mark Grunwald, when thinking about people that kind of steered the ship, right? So, um, it would be Stan, and then Grunwald for me, and then you for the
Well,
Avengers.
that's pretty exclusive company to be in.
Verified
Um,
air.
Yeah, I'll take it on longevity more than on skill or importance or whatever. But thank you very much. It's very nice of you to say.
So how did you end up on Avengers?
I got it by accident. Um,
Nobody else wanted it.
no. It was, this was, right at the beginning of what became Heroes Return. That for the year before, I did Avengers as well as Fantastic Four and Iron Man and Captain America, had been outsourced to two of the then Image studios, Wildstorm, which was Jim Lee's operation, and Extreme, which was Rob Liefeld. And after a year, that deal was ending, and those books were all going to be coming back. I had been working with Kurt Busiek on Thunderbolts. We launched Thunderbolts
Uh-huh.
together during that time, and before that, I'd worked with him on Untold Tales of Spider-Man. And so, um, with the books coming back, Kurt was going to be writing Iron Man, and I was going to edit Iron Man. And in fact, I started working, with Kurt on Iron Man. I hired, after looking around for artists and such, I hired Sean Chen to draw that book. And, we together, myself, Kurt, Sean, with some not direct input, but indirect input from Alex Ross from a design he had done for a pitch that
Wow.
he and Kurt had for the Iron Man title years earlier, designed that Iron Man armor. And so I was going to be the editor of Iron Man. Or during this period, uh, at the suggestion of Ralph Macchio, who then was editing the Spider-Man books, they were looking for somebody to do Avengers, and Ralph made the case that, oh, we should go to George Perez and have George do Avengers. He's well, regarded and respected. He's known for the Avengers back in the '70s. Let's call George and get him to do Avengers. And so Bob Harris, who was the editor in chief at the time, called George and basically said, "Hey, George, do you want to come and do Avengers?" And George was interested, but he said that he didn't want to write it because he felt like he'd been away from Marvel for so long, he didn't know the continuity. So George basically said, he didn't feel confident in his knowledge of the Marvel universe at that point. He'd been away for a while. He wasn't conversant with what was going on, so he wanted one of two guys to write the series with him. He wanted either Mark Waid or Kurt Busiek, and Bob called Kurt first. So Kurt
Wow.
and George were going to do Avengers together, and I think the plan was that Bobby Chase was going to edit it. But as they got to talking, the two of them, they sort of hit on, having somebody that actually knew the continuity and the history and whatnot might be of value. And so they both went to Bob Harris and said, "Hey, how about Tom edits Avengers instead?" And so Bob came to me and said, "Okay, we're going to do this. Bobby will take Iron Man, and you'll do Avengers." And I said, "Okay, that sounds good to me. Fine, let's do that." And so I took over Avengers at that point, and then didn't stop for 26 years.
That you've seen so much in continuity, and I guess so. I'm probably gonna have a lot of editing questions because the editing
Sure,
position is my I think the most unsung position for the fans anyway.
We love editors
Nobody
on Avengers
realizes.
Forever. We
Yeah,
love 'em.
yeah.
We love editors.
We love our editors. Yeah. There's but nobody realizes the work you guys do behind the scenes to make the book run on time and to hire the right creative teams, and that's really the thing that gets me is like how do you pick who's gonna have the best chemistry together? Like the Busiek Perez run is just loved on Avengers Forever
sure,
for the chemistry between the two of them. They just work so well together, the marriage of the writing and the art. But I think the Avengers Forever limited series as well with
sure. With
Busiek
Carlos,
and Carlos Pacheco,
yeah.
that to me was my favorite limited. So
Well, thank you.
it's just almost flawless book that I want to say, I want to say fixed so much in continuity that might have been questionable at the time, but you
Well,
know,
if nothing else, I mean, the goal of Avengers Forever wasn't really to like fix continuity, but it was part of a concerted effort that we had coming into Avengers, which was, it seemed to us, it seemed to me at least, I don't want to speak for George and I don't want to speak for Kurt, but it seemed to me that in the years preceding that, the Avengers really only have two villains of note.
Uh-huh.
Those being Kang and Ultron. Most Avengers villains tend to start out as individual character villains. So they start with Loki, but Loki is really a Thor villain. He's a
Yeah,
Thor
yeah.
character. Or groups. You get a lot of Masters of Evils and Lethal Legions and Zodiacs and things. But in terms of like big villains, the Avengers have two, and they'd both kind of been watered down and let appear in a bunch of not all that great stories for maybe 10, 15 years before we came on. And so coming on, we very concretely went, right, we're gonna have to reestablish and fix Kang and fix Ultron and remind people that like these are big A-list villains, and no more will we let them be, punching bags or buffoons or third raters in other people's stories. And there are innumerable other editors from those 26 years who will tell you what an absolute bastard I was in terms of Kang or Ultron appearing in other stories and how they were handled, and the fact that I would constantly say things like, if Kang enters a story, it's a Kang story. Like there is no story where Kang is the second build player. That's the ground rule. If you're doing
Yeah.
Ultron, he's not the second guy. He runs the show, and so I feel like hopefully, over the course of that time, we restored a little bit of the power and luster to those characters and made those villains more formidable and cooler and put them back on their feet, so to speak. Like they were both great characters to begin with. It's not like we made them that way. We just sort of shook a bunch of the dust and detritus off of them that had accrued over a bunch of years and shine them up again. So that more than anything was the purpose of Avengers Forever. Was let's make Kang cool again and show you why like he's the preeminent Avengers villain.
Wow.
S- So I was just in since we're around that time frame in that part of the 90s, I remember being in university, fall of 96, and at the time, this is pre-internet. I go to the comic store on campus, I get a stack, I sit down, Thunderbolts #1. It's probably one of the WTF moments of comic for me in the last 40 years. Like this is pre-internet, so spoilers weren't exactly a common thing. How did this come about? Like this was just it blew my mind at the time, and I'm just curious. Like you talk about synergies
Sure.
of creative teams, Busick and Bagley. I mean, can you tell us a bit about how that came about?
Yeah, the core idea of Thunderbolts was an idea that Kurt had years earlier. Every once in a while when he was a journeyman writer or a young fan, coming in as he would go places, as he would take long drives from Boston to New York or whatever. One of the ways he would, sort of keep his mind occupied was in coming up with ideas for series he wasn't writing. He still does this, and if you follow his social media at any given point, he'll talk about, I've been thinking about how I might have relaunched Batman in 1970. The most useless, the most useless exercise there is. But one of these ideas was this notion that on a run of Avengers, um, new characters would come in and would join the team, and eventually other characters would rotate out, as tended to happen in the course of Avengers. And by the end of that, you'd end up with one character, which I think was Hawkeye, but Kurt can correct me if I'm wrong there, and like four other guys who'd all like pull the masks off and were actually villains, and it was all a plot. And so he had that idea. So when the Heroes Reborn thing was going to happen, clearly that was like scooping a big chunk of the center of the Marvel universe right out of the place. And so we had an editorial retreat at around that time, that I believe Kurt was at. He might have only been at the second one, which was the one where we pitched it, but there was an earlier one where the conversation basically was, okay, all this real estate is missing from the Marvel universe. What do we fill it in with? How do we make this whole? And Kurt hearing this and remembering his idea from that brainstorming session, came back with this notion of, okay, what if there's no Avengers anymore? What if there's a new team of superheroes that we introduce, and they're bright and shiny and inspiring. They're not like outsiders like the X-Men, and they're not weirdos like Spider-Man. They're Avengers-y kind of team, and they show up and they're doing good things and they come to prominence, and we reveal that they're actually the masters of evil, and they're stepping into this absence to kind of push forward their own plans for domination and profit and conquest and whatnot. But that as they start to do that and start to get the accolades and the respect and whatnot of the people, some of them start to like it and some of them start to waver. And so, at the following editorial retreat, Kurt and I pitched that, mostly Kurt, to Bob Harris, who okayed it. And we did the book. We needed an artist, and Kurt suggested, how about Mark? Mark, he was off. He had come off of Spider-Man around that time. I forget exactly what he was doing, but he had an opening, and so we approached Mark, and Mark was on board for it, and and we did the book. And we had a couple of close calls and near misses with the reveal of what was actually going on being released or promoted accidentally.
Oh,
But somehow, we made it to print, and kept up the ruse for a couple of months there. That, yep, this is a new book with a new team of superheroes that you've never heard of before, and didn't really say anything about the twist, so that when people like yourselves read it when it came out, you were all shocked and surprised, and that let that book run, and it ran for 175 issues before we
yeah.
we eventually cycled it again. And now there's a movie. So not bad for a thing that we just made up.
Oh. I love these inside baseball stories, so we're going to
Mhm.
keep hitting you with these. I have a question for you, and you may or may not have an answer for me on that. But you brought up Heroes Return a couple of times already, and Heroes Reborn,
Mhm.
whatever we're going to call it. What was the feeling around Marvel's offices back when it was really kind of figured out that they were going to sub out Avengers, Captain America, Fantastic Four out to Image to publish? It couldn't have been a very happy time in Marvel's bullpen, could it have?
No, no. I mean, again, this is no shock. This is no
This
surprise.
is softball question.
It's they're outsourcing all of your jobs. How do you feel?
Yeah.
Like that's what you're talking about. And
Uh-huh.
we had during that period, we had a bunch of layoffs. Yeah, the big one, which was right after Bob Harris took over. There was a year before that where there were 5 editor-in-chiefs, each one running part of the line, and eventually it all consolidated back down to Bob. And one of the first things he had to do was like let 40% of the staff go. So there was a lot of bloodletting. So certainly on our end, nobody was terribly enthusiastic about the idea that, oh, we're gonna give these books to these other guys, and they'll get more money and more resources and more whatever to make them than our guys got. And if they do well, maybe we'll give them all the stuff. So of course nobody was especially pleased with that, but that was the call. That was what was going on, and that was all you could do, was continue to move forward and try to make good comics, and hope that would ultimately win out the day.
Now, looking back on that, do you feel like that might have been like more of a disastrous decision, or do you think that they think back on, say, wait, never should have done that, or
Well, I think a couple of things. I mean, not for nothing, but those Heroes Reborn books, at least particularly initially, sold phenomenally well.
right?
To this day, that Heroes Reborn Avengers #1 is the best-selling single issue of the book ever. So on that level, you kind of can't look at it and go, "Oh, that was a huge, terrible mistake." At the time, most of those titles were sort of languishing, in the mid list or lower. The zeitgeist kind of wasn't with them. It was all very much X-Men and Spider-Man. And so again, while I didn't like it as somebody on Marvel's staff that this was being done, I can look at that situation now and go, I understand why somebody thought, oh, Jim and Rob have sold a lot of comics and they've got operations where they publish comics every month. What if we gave them some of this stuff that's not doing too well and see what they could do with it? And in terms of like getting attention back, I mean, if we had just gone from Bob Harris, Terry Kavanagh, Mike Diodato, Avengers at the end of that post run to George and Kurt, I don't think the George and Kurt book would have sold half as well
Mm,
as it did when it came back. That to some degree, the fact that those books were being talked about, whether people liked them or didn't like them, and were being paid attention to, and were sort of at the center of this controversy, brought them a whole bunch of energy that they didn't have for the first half of the '90s. And so, was it a mistake? I don't. Again, it wasn't a choice I wanted to see made, and I don't know that it's a choice that I would have made. But I don't know that I can go so far as to say mistake. Like
mm,
so many of these things, like you never know what's going to happen if you make a different choice.
yeah.
So, the end result was things worked out more or less, at least for me, for the 40% of the staff that was let go, maybe not so much, but in terms of bringing those characters and those properties kind of back to the fore, it did the job it was supposed to do.
Yeah, no, well, to me, like, as a reader at that time, it was kind of a scary proposition for like, I didn't know, like you said, I didn't know if they were gonna start farming out the properties to other publishers, um, to kind of play with the characters for a little while. I was relieved when, I don't wanna say Image dropped the ball towards the end of those books, but kinda did,
Right.
but to have them come back to Marvel and then have such, what I wanna say, historic creative teams come on those books,
Hmm.
where I mean, we can look back 30 years now and say, "Wow, that was like a renaissance almost
Hmm.
of Marvel, kind of, embracing those books again and making them important, uh,
Right.
parts of the Marvel universe." And then, of course, who would have known that just a few years later we would have the MCU, right?
Sure.
Which
Sure.
which blasted you guys up to the stratosphere, right?
Right. Right.
So,
But doing Heroes Return, like, again, one of the things that made that the initiative that it was those books were coming back.
mhm.
And what that kind of meant was, hang on a second, I've fouled up there we go. Uh, Closing that browser window that made the ding. Um, what those books coming back meant was, you didn't want them to come back to Marvel Editorial and for all the numbers to to immediately drop down again.
Right.
You sort of had to show that you could do it as well or better than the guys that had it, and do as well or better with less money and resources to work at it with. So when those books were coming back, like everybody involved editorially, from Bob Harris and on down, Bobby Chase and Ralph and me and all the folks that were involved were very motivated to go, right. We need a Fantastic Four book that's going to capture that same energy. We need a Captain America book that's going to do what we need it to do. We need an Iron Man book. And so that was very much a driving force in why those books got the attention that they got and why they were hit so hard and promoted so hard. We're able to kind of stick their existence as a key part of the Marvel universe in a way that in the first half of the '90s they kind of weren't.
Mm. Who made the decision to bring Chris Claremont on a Fantastic Four? Because I thought that was kind of like a genius decision on that.
That probably was because I wasn't there for that. Scott Lobdell relaunched Fantastic Four, Scott and Alan Davis. And
Right, but then
Scott only
Chris
ended
came
up
on.
doing like 4 issues, and the 4th one he only plotted. At that time, Chris was on staff. Chris had come on staff at Marvel. He was in like an executive editor position. It was part of an agreement that was made with him, because they were starting to get into the prep for the X-Men movies, and they wanted to have him as a member of the staff. So he was there. So when I don't remember, because I wasn't working on Fantastic Four at that point, all the specifics of what was going on with Scott. I know he was doing some Hollywood work at that time, and it could be that he got busy or got pulled by some other thing, and somebody had to step in. Bobby Chase was editing Fantastic Four. So again, it might have been her decision, or it might have been Bob or them together to go, hey, Chris, could you script this issue of Fantastic Four that Scott plotted? Hey, we need somebody to do this book. How about you write Fantastic Four? It's something different than what you had been doing on X-Men for all those years. But, it's in the Marvel Universe. It's a core title. It'll use the same muscles. And, Salvador Larroca stepped in, when Alan Davis, likewise, he only agreed to do the first 3 issues. And so after that, they needed a person, and that was Salva. And then they ended up doing, Salva and Chris together did whatever it was, 3
Yeah,
years,
3 years on the book. Yeah.
without a break.
Yeah. No, though I thought that was almost as big a team as Busiek and Perez. I thought they brought Fantastic Four back to the forefront,
Mhm.
made them important again.
Well, they were
You know.
definitely, again, it was definitely like a good run of consistency. Like they were
Yes.
there every month. Like they didn't miss, and they hit it with both fists.
That's so maybe that's another question that I have for you, because nowadays, creative teams don't really last too long on those books. So very rarely, right? I mean,
Mhm.
they get hired to do a story, and then they're gone. Is there kind of like do you feel bad that you don't get that too much anymore, where a writer or an artist stays for a long time and
Well, I mean,
becomes part of the
I think it
woodwork?
I think it depends on what you consider a long time. And it's a very different market, and it's a very different set of circumstances. But, at the
Mm,
beginment of this podcast, you just talked about, well, Jed McKay's run on Avengers is ending. That's 36 issues
right, right.
that Jed did, plus, specials, plus the timeless lead-ins, plus Blood Hunt. So that's a significant chunk of change, particularly these days. It's easier to get a longer run on a more established title, because one of the benefits of Avengers is we're not as likely to cancel it. Even if for whatever reason Jed comes on and the book tanks, what we're more likely to do is go, quick, wrap his run up. We got to relaunch this again, as opposed to other titles. If it was Alpha Flight, we could go, well, we don't need an Alpha Flight title every month. That run didn't go so well. We'll end it, and maybe somebody will have a better idea for Alpha Flight next year, and we can try again with a different thing.
I
I like and appreciate the consistency of a creative team, but I also know that um, the fan audience, particularly, fan. You ask any fan, and they'll say, "Yes, I like that," but then you actually give that to them, and often it's underappreciated because that team is maybe not the flashiest team in the world,
Mm.
or is not as exciting as the team on some other thing. And so the places where, again, you can look at, Mark Bagley did 50 issues of Thunderbolts with Kurt and then Fabian, and he did 110
Yeah.
issues of Ultimate Spider-Man with Brian. And people appreciated and liked his run on Ultimate Spider-Man. But they don't necessarily pay any attention to the Thunderbolts run. It wasn't the thing that was attracting them there, and there were bigger or more important or more attractive things going on around it. So that bedrock of a team that's there every single month, what people really want is they want the most excellent team there every month, and the trade off on that sometimes is you can have Brian Hitch, but Brian takes a certain amount of time to draw every one of those massive detailed pages that he does. And that means you're probably on a monthly release schedule, at least, not going to be able to get as many issues consecutively before you need somebody else to jump in. Or, as in the case of the Ultimates, you make the tactical decision. Okay, this is special enough that we're going to be okay financially and otherwise with having some months where there is no issue of the Ultimates, because we want this all to be of one, one unified thing. And in that form, we'll sell it forever as collected editions or whatnot. But especially nowadays, when a lot of our books ship more than 12 issues a month. I mean, I'm doing 2 X-Men titles right now that do 18 issues a year. And even there, for the summer, I'm going even faster, because
Wow.
people love X-Men. It turns out. I don't know if you guys knew this, but people
That's the
people
other podcast.
yeah, people dig the X-Men, and so there's a hunger there that you can only sate by coming out more frequently. But that makes it much more difficult to be consistent, particularly on the art side. You can have the same writer, in that a little bit easier, because it's easier to do 18 scripts a year than it is to draw 18 issues or even 12 issues a year. And the expectation of the artists is different today than it was during even the 90s. The degree of detail that's expected by the fans, what is appreciated by the readership, and and the cost value benefit of that. Like, comics are more expensive now than they used to be, so people want to feel like they really got their money's worth out of this. And Eric Larson has an image that shows up on his social media every now and again when he's talking about this question, and it's just 2 shots of Captain America's foot, and one is from How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, and it's the typical Captain America Buccaneer boot, and John Buscema has drawn it in like 6 lines. And the other shot is a foot of Captain America from some issue of the Ultimates, and Brian Hitch has drawn it, and every lace and every seam and you look at the 2 of those, and it's like that. This is why you can't have this. Guys do as much as they used to, because everybody was fine with John performing at this level and doing 12 or even 24 comics a year, but people want what Brian does. Doing that, you're only going to get 6
Yeah.
because it just takes longer. So it's that sort of thing. As an old guy, I like and appreciate a consistent run. As a longtime editor, I understand all the difficulties with doing that, and even the fact that sometimes having a consistent run doesn't help you. On Exceptional X-Men, which we just sort of wrapped up before going into the recent Age of Revelation. Eve Ewing and Carmen Carniero did the first 10 issues of that book solid. And nobody cared. And I say nobody cared in a nobody paid attention to it. Like, nobody pointed it out and went, "Holy mackerel, look at that. Carmen's done 8 of these in a row and she's still going." It was sort of taken for granted. People that liked the book. People that didn't like the book or didn't read the book. Either way, and it wasn't like there was any great notice given to that as part of the accomplishment. And so when the audience ultimately is indifferent, then the companies become indifferent. That's not valued. Therefore, it's not as valuable, and other things are given precedence. It's more important that we come out every month, or we come out, at whatever velocity we want to come out at, than it is to keep that consistency.
Well, I think back in the day, like it was every month an issue came out. Maybe you had a fill-in issue, because
Yep.
like a little while ago, we had one of these interviews with Tom DeFalco, and it was just interesting how some people get on a run because they're filling in, and then
Yeah.
it's like, well, since you did a good job, keep it on going, and away
Right.
you go. So it's funny how it was always every month an issue had to come out, whereas now it seems maybe you can push it out a month if need be, because you've got to allow time for the quality.
Again, generally speaking, we do have to have an issue every month. There are rare instances where we'll take something that's special, but if you do that too often, turns out you don't have any money and you can't keep the lights on. So
Hmm.
you do have to publish. If you have a line we put out approximately 65, 70 titles a month. And in that, you can maybe pick one or two spots where you go, this is important. We want to keep this consistency. This is something special. This will be great as an evergreen collection. But you can't do it with a third of the line. You won't be able to keep operating. So if you're not one of those rarefied air books, then yeah, you need an issue of Iron Man to come out every month, regardless. The thing that makes that more difficult now than in the days Tom was talking about is that in Tom's days, comics were still largely being sold on what we used to call the newsstand business.
Yeah.
And the newsstand business was a non-returnable magazine circulation business. Your average candy store or 7-Eleven or convenience store would put in an order, and that order would be for 300 comics. So whatever 300 comics, the distributor would send is what they would put on their rack. They would sell whatever they sold, and anything that was unsold, they'd send back for credit. And so on that methodology, having a fill-in issue didn't really impact on your ability to get to the stands and to get in front of readers' eyes. All that the store, all that the 7-Eleven was saying is send me 300 comic books. As things have moved more and more into the direct sales market, the direct sales retailers buy on a non-returnable basis. So once they've bought it, it's theirs to keep, uh, whether they sell it or not. And consequently, that means they have to be more selective about what they're ordering. And so, if you have an issue that's a fill-in issue, and you solicit, well, now it's a fill-in issue. Um, your numbers tend to drop because retailers go, my clientele is not going to be as interested in buying this. I'm going to get stuck with these. I'd better order fewer of them. And that's why these days it's very, very rare to see a fill-in of the sort that was ubiquitous in the days that Tom was editing. In those days we used to have a completed issue in the drawer at all times, at least one, sometimes two, if it was a big enough book, because if you got into an emergency, you had something you could print. And these days it's much more important to not have that, because that will tank you just as easily as not having an issue. And so the circumstances are just different.
Are most books now basically like a plan on having a 5 issues to tell your story, and then we decide whether or not that's going to continue if the sales meet expectations? Because I've seen books solicited for like 5 issues and then they're canceled so quick because I guess maybe orders aren't high enough that like before the second issue is solicited, it's canceled.
Sure. I mean, honestly, it depends on what it is.
Okay.
Certainly, when we talk about like your perennial titles, so Avengers and Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Daredevil, the Hulk, what have you, there's a much greater chance that something is going to be able to run for a longer time. And so those aren't really approved in we do a few and then you go. Anything that you're launching that's new, or that's a revival of something that hasn't been around for a while or hasn't had that success, you're kind of at the mercy of the marketplace and the audience.
Yeah.
And the audience only has so much disposable income and so much time, and there's a lot of comics out there from a lot of people. We wish they wouldn't buy all those other companies' comics, but they do, and that's fine. So you're competing for every dollar. And so sometimes very early on, you can see, well, the orders on number 1 were this. By number 3, we're going to be dead, and by number 5, we're going to be bleeding money. So you have no choice. We don't go out with anything that's intended to be a regular ongoing series with the intention of, we're gonna like fail. We go out every time, we go out on the field, we're gonna play the game, we're gonna win. But like any sports team, sometimes they go out in the field and you win, and sometimes you go out in the field and the other guy beats you. And that's what makes it sports. It's not math. So again, there are things that are deliberately designed as limited series, 1 of 5. There are books that we launch and go, hopefully this can get an audience and find traction and live for a while. Thunderbolts. Here's a new thing. Can it capture that audience? At the same time that we launched Thunderbolts, we launched Maverick, and Maverick ran 12 issues. That one didn't connect in the same way. At that same time, we launched Heroes for Hire, and Heroes for Hire went. I'm doing this from memory, so 19 or 20 issues.
Mhm.
So did all right. Not as good as Thunderbolts did. Thunderbolts was one that lasted the test of time. We did Kazar around that time, and Kazar ran about 19 issues. So it's that same sort of thing. You're somewhat at the mercy of the audience and the retailers. They only have so much money to spend. What are we launching that month? What's DC launching that month? What's Image launching that month? What Dark Horse launching that month? What is it that captures the interest of all of you guys as comic book buyers, and makes you want to show up and read it and talk about it and pick up the next one? And is it enough to keep things going perpetually?
Right.
It's much harder to keep things running perpetually, and we have a fairly high, barrier of survival. Like we're an expensive company. We have an office in Midtown Manhattan that ain't cheap,
Mm.
so we need to put out books that sell at a certain level to continue to be able to operate. So it's very, it's merciless, and it can be crushing to people, but it's also very Darwinistic. Like here's a chance, here's a ball and a bat, kid, go out and play the game, and if you hit it right, you can be Thunderbolts, and if you hit it wrong, well, maybe you get another at bat next time. That's just the way of it.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
Let me ask a question. Um, so I fully understand the whole sales in the comic, as in, at one point, Jed McKay, he was, the writer of the most recent Avengers. He was writing Avengers, Moon Knight, which I love, I believe Doctor Strange,
Yep.
um, and maybe something else, but he was writing quite a bit of books at the same time. And, I thought all the series were wonderful. And recently, you guys signed Philip Kennedy Johnson to an exclusive,
Yep.
and Joshua Williamson, right? He's on exclusive too.
No, he's writing Iron Man, but he's not
Oh,
exclusive. He's
okay,
still writing stuff
mm,
for DC, and he's still
okay,
writing stuff for Skybound. But yeah, he's writing for Marvel, so sure.
okay. So, do you think, like, well, Philip Kennedy Johnson, since he's writing Infernal Hulk right now, and which I'm loving it. If you haven't gotten it, go get Philip Kennedy Johnson Infernal Hulk. That's my Marvel pitch. But so if sales were to go main high on Hulk, and I don't know the sales projections for Hulk, like, and since he has an exclusive, do you think the name recognition of Philip Kennedy Johnson would be able to um go to a different title for since you're writing like 60, 70 titles, not specific, I'm not naming any specific title, but like do you think how it works?
Um, well, yeah, obviously, if somebody's got success, if somebody finds some success, people are likely to put more offers in front of them. And so, I mean, Philip came over to doing Hulk from being over at DC, where he did Batman and Robin, and he did a whole lot of Superman. I have an enormous War World trade paperback in the other room that's waiting for me to crack it. That he wrote. That's about 5,000 pages long. Um, and so having success or doing stories that people respond to, that goes for the editors in the field as well. Certainly, we don't sign somebody to an exclusive because we don't have faith in them. So our expectation of somebody like Philip would be, oh, Philip's going to come over here. He's going to write as much as he can. We're going to put him in places to succeed for him and for us, and everybody's going to benefit from that. So is it possible that Philip will do other books and other projects? Yes, depending on every writer is sort of different. Some guys can do a lot of writing, write a lot of books in a given month, and some people can write only a few. So depending on how much capacity he has, and we'll test that very conclusively, which is to say, institutionally, because we're stupid, even though we've done this for so many years, no matter what the number of titles is that somebody can write, we'll find a way to give them one more than that so that the whole process becomes difficult. So, again, it's sort of like, I don't know, like that game, Don't Break the Ice. um, from back in the day, like we'll knock, can you do one book? Okay, one ice cube went down and the thing's fine. How about two? How about three? What if you did this limited series of, all the ice fell in? That's where the boundary is, but we don't know that until we try. And even once we learn that, the heart wants what it wants. Your number is two, but we really have this other thing, and it would be really cool, and you really want to do it. Okay, let's try. Right into the brick wall we go. So that sort of thing happens. But yeah, the very fact that Philip is under exclusive to Marvel now. He's going to be doing more stuff for us. Certainly continuing on Infernal Hulk, probably some more stuff with the Hell Hunters because he loves those characters and did a bunch of setup for them, and other stuff that we're not ready to say anything about yet.
Oh.
Oh,
See, you guys think he's going to spill the tea. I told you. We
I
don't get any
tried.
news.
I tried.
We
I
just
can
want to know
only-
who's going to write Avengers.
I can only tell you what I can. Well, Avengers isn't me anymore, boys. So you called the wrong guy this time.
No,
You gotta bring Will Moss on here. I could tell you, but I won't tell you because it's not my thing. This is Will's now. So it'll be a human, and I'm pretty sure they'll have all of their digits. So they won't be typing any slower.
if I say Chip Zdarsky and I'm right, blink twice.
You're just gonna have to wait and see what happens.
How important is social media? I know you were here before social media, but now you're in this age of like instant feedback. So like as soon as the book hits the shelf, you guys know how it's doing or how it's received. How has that changed the way you guys do things? You're more aware of how things are going. But do you always wait till the sales figures come in before you pull the trigger on something? Or if you see something so like maybe a huge negative reaction, you're maybe jumping the gun a little, do you think?
See, these are the conversations that get me in trouble with fans because they don't like hearing the truth that I tell here.
I love truth.
Which is this will not shock you, I'm sure. Social media is kind of a cesspool.
Absolutely. Agreed.
And so by nature, no matter what you're doing, no matter what book you're working on, no matter what thing there is,
the worst common denominator comes out to say something.
Right. Yeah, very, very much so. Like, you don't have to go. Literally everything that we're publishing and have ever published stinks. And you can find that as the barometer. The reason we react far more to what a book sells than what people are saying about it is because it's about what people do rather than what they say. And this was true even before social media. This used to be a truism that, in Tom DeFalco's days and before, they used to talk about. Mark Grunwald used to do weekly assistant editor classes for the assistants. And, one of the things that they would talk about is, you have to listen to what the fans do, not what they say. It's sort of the equivalent of if somebody comes to you with a petition, sign my petition for whatever thing. We're going to stamp out evil. Sign my petition. Like, people do it, and you'll have 5,000. I got 5,000 people to sign this petition to stamp out evil. Okay, well, in order to stamp out evil, I need people to go and press this button over there. How many of those 5,000 people are going to walk down that street and do that thing? Some of them will because they genuinely believe in this thing.
Yep.
Some of them will, well, I'd like to see that button pressed, but I don't have time to walk all the way over there and press that button. And some of them are like, I don't really care if the button is pressed either way. I did you a solid by signing your stupid petition, and now you want me to go for a walk. It's, Joe Quesada used to often say that, fans vote with their dollars and their feet. And I think that that's accurate. And so, you'll get, there was a whole exchange that's been bouncing around social media for this last week or so where some some fan who was still upset about One More Day responded to Joe's, a Substack Joe had put up that was about that had pretty much nothing to do with that particular story, and was very irate about how that had ruined Spider-Man forever and it destroyed everything. And Joe very sort of calmly and patiently went, I'm sorry that we did that and that Spider-Man has had no success since the year 2007 and he's been forgotten by everybody because, clearly that's not the case. But for that fan, like that was that's a big important thing. It looms large in their mind, and if only that could be fixed or changed, that would make everything great, and the teeming thousands would come back and read Spider-Man. Spider-Man's still our best-selling monthly title. So there's no problem with Spider-Man. Spider-Man's working just fine, so it's that difference between, again, positively or negatively, what people say and what they do. When I was editing, for the brief period back in the 90s that I was editing Black Panther, when Christopher Priest was writing it, there was no book in the line that got more positive feedback and buzz than Black Panther, and it was always teetering on the edge of cancellation. And we worked crazy hard coming up with things that we could do in the book to keep the sales at a level where we wouldn't have to terminate it. And that doesn't mean that those fans were wrong. We just needed more like them. They were passionate and they were ready to go, but there just weren't enough of them. But on social media, everything is amplified. Everything, you get 5 people all talking about something, and it sounds like there's 5,000 of them. And there isn't.
Yeah.
There's only 5,000 when there's actually 5,000. And so the only way to really know, do you have 5,000 or do you have 5, is to look and see how many people actually bought that thing, how many people actually made the walk and dropped their dollars versus not. That's the truest representation. Do we all look at it to some degree? You can't avoid it.
Hmm.
And you look at everything and you take it all on board. Like, I'm very fairly visible on social media. People know where to find me. You guys certainly did.
I did,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and so, when I have books that come out, I see what the chatter is, and it's all feedback and it's all information. It all goes into the back of my brain, but I try not to give any of it individually undue weight. If what people are saying online matches what I'm seeing them do, that's real. I should maybe take some action about that. If there are people that are talking online that doesn't match what I see them doing, I'm going to react to what they're doing rather than what they're talking about. And so that's, and again, particularly for people that are advocating for change, if you're that Spider-Man fan that was busting on Joe, you don't want to hear that. You want to hear everybody in the world is behind me and everybody believes, if you would just do the thing I want for Spider-Man, everything would be great. And maybe it would, but that's not necessarily what the numbers are showing us. And
Well,
so, you're asking us to put out a fire in a place where there's no fire. Um,
it's
we're going to pay attention to where the fire actually is and try to fix those first.
it's a lot of us older fans that kind of get stuck in the whole nostalgia thing and can't really adapt to what the changes are in the industry. Nothing stays the same forever. So,
Right.
Yeah,
you
get
know,
off of my
And it
lawn. Yeah.
and it wasn't, I mean, it wasn't the same, like, when we were reading comics, it wasn't the same as it was, 10 years before us or whatever.
correct.
Stuff changes for everybody, the kinds of arguments that I hear all the time are analogous to, back in the 50s, television programs got viewerships in the billions. You should make all the shows black and white again, because then they would have that kind of audience again.
Mm.
And it's like, no, a lot of things have changed since then beyond just that. That's correlation. That's not causation. Those didn't do well because they were black and white. They did well because the number of options were smaller, and consequently the audience base was larger, and it wasn't as spread out across so many different things as it is today. Um, it's these are the things that we on the inside have to look at and study and scrutinize. And honestly, I can't expect any fan to know or care about my problems. You just want what you want. You want a good Avengers comic. I can
Mm,
relate to that. And if your feeling is whatever, Jed McKay or Chip Zdarsky or Kurt Busiek or whomever is the person or is not the person, you're gonna bang on the table and tell me that one way or the other. And if you are actually in tune with what everybody, with the mass of Avengers readers are feeling, then more likely I'm going to respond to that. If you're not, then you're going to live a sad, unhappy life in my in my world, because I'm not going to react to that to do exactly the thing that you want. Or I'll do something and you'll be mad. Oh, I told him to do something and he did something, but he did a thing that was different than the thing I was saying, and I'm still not happy. Sometimes you can get what you want and not be happy. So this is, it's an incredibly complicated thing because it's not science. It's alchemy. It's art. It's
mm.
entertainment. And so one and one doesn't always equal two. Um, it's a mysterious process.
So speaking about change, I actually wrote down a change question because since you've been around for so long, I wrote down like a lot of the different changes that we've seen in the last almost 40 years for comics. And I had like, so Marvel goes public and,
Yep.
becomes publicly traded company. They go through bankruptcy and acquisition. I said social media already, but
Yep.
different like digital innovations, like the move towards digital,
Sure.
trade paperbacks,
Yep.
the MCU, Disney buying Marvel,
Hmm.
and the question really, so what has been the biggest change over the years that you had to adapt to, or did you have the most difficulty adapting?
Yeah. With all the things that you mentioned, like every single situation that I encountered and have encountered over my many years at Marvel, had its own difficulties and its own challenges. Um, like anything, something is new, something changes. You grapple with it, you complain about it for a while, you get used to it, you adapt to it, and then it becomes the way you do things, and you don't think about the other stuff. When I started, we worked on paper. There was comics were done on physical boards, and lettering was done with a pen on the board more often than not, and sometimes on vellum, and that was all cut out and pasted up. And I did a lot of paste up in my day, and lettering corrections and simple art corrections and stuff that you would do right on the board. And it's not like nobody that we work with these days works on paper anymore, but a large portion of what we do is now digital, and there's pluses and minuses to that. One of the pluses is speed and reach. Back in my day, you would FedEx pages to the next
Mm,
person in line. So John Romita Jr. would come in with pages from an issue of Hulk, and I would have to package them up in a FedEx and send them out to Tom Palmer or Klaus Janson to ink. And that was that's a at least a 1 day, if not a 2 day operation just to get to him, either of him. And then they would ink them and they would send them back to us. And, you would send them out to be colored, and so forth. And now, uh, those pages get there instantly.
mm.
Um, they can be zapped across, computer lines, and suddenly you've saved all that time. But by saving all that time, what you've really done is it means you can push everything closer to the to the deadline date. So,
Yeah.
especially since, the thing we were talking about earlier, where the needs of the art are now more complicated, you can now give John Romita Jr. more time to draw more complicated backgrounds, and Klaus or Tom more time to ink those in, because you've saved the time that it would have taken to physically ship those pages around. But the work is the same. The story is still the story. The visual storytelling is still the visual storytelling, and the things that make it work or not work for the audience are the same. Um, so while all the mishigas around it is different, all the methodology is different. I can remember when we started to started to experiment with digital lettering rather than having hand lettering. I did some of the earliest stuff on that on Untold Tales of Spider-Man with Richard Starkings, and it was all primitive enough that Richard was uh, doing all of the lettering digitally, and he would send it in, and we would print it out onto paper and cut it out and paste it onto the boards, which today seems crazy. Because everything these days is all composited digitally, and we have a digital file of the lettering and a digital file of the color file, and the compositor puts those together, and away you go. But in those days, it was alien, and we didn't know how to do it, and we didn't have the tech handy to do it, and so that was what we did until we changed. When I started, comics were hand separated, well, which means we had a limitation. There were 64 available colors for a comic book because it was all dot screen patterns, and you would do what were then called color guides, which were essentially Xerox copies of the original artboard that would be colored with Dr. Martin dyes or with magic markers or things, and then coded with one of 64 numerical codes that would say this color is made up of these percentages of red, blue, and black. And all of that would go out to a separation house where a lot of old ladies in bad ventilation, who now all have cancer, would sit and put down ruby lithed dyes matching where the colors at the different gradations were supposed to be on the final printing plate to make those separations, and then they'd send them back to us, and we would check them, and we would have corrections, and they would never make the corrections properly, and eventually the comic would print. And at a certain point, it became possible for the colorist, the person doing the actual color choices, coloring, to do the full separation themselves, and that's what everybody does now. Like our colorists, all what they color is what they do, is what sees print, and they're not limited to 64 colors. They have an infinite number of colors because now you can mix colors all up and down the spectrum because the printing technology is different. So in terms of like what's the one thing that's, I don't know if there's any one specific thing. It was everything was all a change, a shift away from the newsstand market, more into the direct market, a shift into places where comics are sold as collections, your book business, the whole opening of the digital marketplace and comics that are as a digital form. All of these things are changes and adaptations, and there'll be more going forward that I haven't even half thought of yet. But we'll tackle them and find ways to adapt to them and incorporate them into what we do, and we'll bitch about them while we're figuring it out, and eventually they'll become part of the workflow, and that'll be the thing we're doing. I mean, on a purely human level, probably, a bankruptcy slash all of the layoffs is probably the most harrowing, because that's actually watching a whole bunch of people lose their employment and no longer be part of what's going on. So if you want me to pick one, that one's probably the most impactful, just because of the actual tangible impact that it had on a lot of people's lives. But yeah, it's all kind of been, there are days that are good days, there are days that are bad days, and that's this week, and that was a week 10 years ago, and that was a week 20 years ago. And the specific things that were bad and good are different, but you had both of them at all of those times. And so you just dealt with it every day and did the best you could, and hopefully found ways to rise to whatever the challenges were, and succeeded.
So, I guess my next question, unless Mike wants to jump in. Mike, do you have a question? Because I have a ton
I
of them.
just, not to be the continuity trivia trash geek guy that I like to be, but you talk about, putting the right creative teams on the right books at the right times, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Brian Bendis, Avengers. I mean, Ultimate Spider-Man, he nailed that out of the park, but Avengers, and making the Avengers into essentially a Justice League with all the top names in it, not just the standard Avengers people we've known for 30 years. Suddenly you've got Wolverine, Spider-Man, What brought that on? What was the conversation around that time to totally do that big revamping? We're talking Armageddon coming up being similar in scope to what Disassembled did. I'm just curious, how did Disassembled even, take off the way it did?
Well, I can talk more about Disassembled than I can about Armageddon. I think again, because we haven't said too much about what Armageddon is,
Mhm.
I think a lot of fans are jumping to conclusions and jumping the gun on what it is, and may not yet be in sync with what that thing actually is. But putting all of that aside, in terms of Disassembled, there was I've mentioned the editorial retreats. We do at least two, usually three of those a year, which is these meetings where all the editors and a bunch of our key talent, writers and artists, come into town, and we spend 3 days, 3 days talking about the plans. What are people planning to do in their books? What do we have coming up? What other ideas are there? And those ideas kind of get banged on a little bit. And so there was a particular retreat at around that period, 2004, I'll say. Um, and I believe it was the first retreat that Dan Buckley was at coming back. Dan had worked at Marvel in the 90s. And he had come back in the early to mid 2000s, as publisher. So at that particular retreat, a lot of time was being spent focusing on, up to that point, the last couple of years before that, the Ultimate Universe had been set up and established, and it was kind of like this big, mighty thing that put Marvel back on the map. And so at this retreat, the question was, starting with, was how do we harness some of that energy and feed it back into the mainstream Marvel universe? And that became a conversation about individual titles and individual properties. Like, what is Iron Man? What should it be in 2004? What is it about? What are the things that make it? What kind of book should this be? What should it be about? Who should be doing it? What kind of stories should we be telling? What kind of stuff should be there? And at a certain point, the conversation, rolled around to Avengers. And it was Mark Miller, I believe, who said, like, when he was a kid growing up, he would buy Justice League of America because he only had the money for a couple of comics every month, and by buying Justice League, he would get 18 superheroes as opposed to one or two, and all the best superheroes. I'd get Superman and Batman and Flash and Green Lantern and Wonder Woman and everybody, and some other people that I didn't know as much, but I got all the best ones. And so to Mark, he said, like, why are the Avengers the Avengers? Like, why is it these guys right now? Why isn't the Avengers all of the best superheroes? Why isn't it, Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man, sure, but also Spider-Man and Wolverine and whomever else, the Hulk and Daredevil, and why isn't it that? Why don't we just do that? And that is an idea, caught fire in the room, and I was very dead set against it, to be honest. People remember me, comically, changing color all through that whole meeting process, because essentially, I at that point I'd been editing Avengers for 6 or 7 years, 5 or 6 years, something like that. And so, like, this was a structure I had put a lot of work into. And you're talking about going, that structure's no good, knock that down, let's start again, or whatever. But, like, the one thing I had kind of like walking out of that day's meeting was, I had worked with Mark before. We had done years earlier, Skrull Kill Crew. So I knew Mark pretty well, and I thought, oh, okay, well, if Mark wants to do this, and if Mark wants to write it, Mark writing Avengers is exciting, and I can work with him. That'll be fine. And I came in the next day, and that night, the night before, people had gone out to dinner, and Mark and Brian went out, and Brian had a conversation with Mark. They worked pretty tightly together because they were the two guys that were really doing all the Ultimate stuff. And Brian said to Mark, "Hey, I really, I really want to do this Avengers thing. Like, I think I've got it. I think I know what this should be, and I'm really interested in it." And Mark was like, "Okay, if you want to do it, you do it." And so they came in the next day, and so it was, oh, now Brian's going to be writing this, and I was sort of like, because I'd never really worked with Brian. I knew him, a little bit from a distance, but I'd never really worked with Brian before. And so now it was this crazy thing that was going to knock over my building with somebody that I hadn't had any history with. Um, but I mean, in all of that, and in all of the process of rebuilding that book for that, the one thing that I always knew would work was New Avengers, because that basic idea of it's like a Justice League, and here's all the best characters in the same book together, done by big guys. Of course, that's going to sell well. um, for me, the more traumatic part was the Avengers Disassembled of it all, where you got to blow everything up to get to that. But I always knew that once we got to New Avengers, it would work. It was just, could I honorably get to that? And Brian and I found our common ground, working through all that stuff. And he and I did 8-9 years of Avengers together. He wrote an awful lot of Avengers, not just one book, but often two, and in some cases two on a limited series, and such. And he really became the mainstay, the backbone of Avengers for a decade. And Avengers, as a result of that, kind of shifted to the center of the Marvel universe in a way that it hadn't been for a long time, and kind of hasn't been now for a little while. So it was a good thing all around for the book, and for Marvel and for everybody. But it was definitely a traumatic birthing process, at least for me, because I was invested in it, in the thing as it was. Now these days I get to do that to other people. So what goes around comes around. I've been on the other side of that argument in a bunch of issues in recent years too. But so that's it. It was really all about what should Avengers be in 2004, and how do we capture some of the excitement that people have about the Ultimates and the Ultimate Universe and all the other things that were going on at that time.
So that actually shifted gears on books, and kind of breathed new life into certain books. My next question really is your opinion on events. I know that, say, you've run enough of your own events like Civil War, but do you feel, especially now where I kind of feel like they happen more often, do you feel like they interrupt certain runs or the flows of certain books, or do you think that it enhances the storylines in kind of like core books like X-Men and Avengers, and gives them opportunity to establish new status quos? It
I
work
think
both ways.
Yeah, I think the real answer there is both. It depends on what story you're telling and who's involved and what they want to do. You can point to examples of both things. The thing that I'll say here, going back to our earlier conversation, is every fan on Earth will tell you, "Oh, I hate these big events. They constantly interrupt my titles that I like and whatnot." There was a year, I think it was around 2010. It was right after we did Siege. We went into what we call the heroic age, and we went, for a year now. This year we're not going to do any big events. We've heard you. You've all said you've got event fatigue. You're done. We hear you. We're just going to focus on making our books super excellent, and they're all going to be their own thing. Everybody can cheer. And we had the worst numbers that year. And that was
Okay.
the year, that DC kind of like came up behind us and ate our lunch a little bit. And we went, okay, we spent too much time listening to what people were saying and not enough attention to what they were doing. Because for all that everybody complains about those things, and not everyone sells as well as every other one. There are better ones and there are worse ones, like there are with everything. But when you've got one of them that's working, it's selling better than everything else that you're publishing. So clearly the audience as a whole, there's something in at least the potential of those that people respond to. And I think on the most, kid cool sort of level, the thing that every reader wants is, what's that one story that has all the best superheroes and supervillains in it, and they're all fighting in the biggest battle ever, and it's so stunning and amazing, and like that's the thing that every 12-year-old wants, and every 12-year-old that's now 50 years old also kind of wants, even if they don't want to admit it. Um,
It's true.
so
100%.
yeah, that's the potential of an event story. I think as comics have gotten pricier and it's become more difficult to go out that far, we're experimenting more these days with sort of smaller scale events, smaller scale in terms of number of tie-ins rather than importance. And
Right.
so these days, you're more likely, at least at the moment, to see, oh, we're going to do a Spider-Man event here, and it's going to mostly be Spider-Man stuff, and maybe a little bit of other things around the edges, but that's a Spider-Man story, and here's an X-Men event, or here's an Avengers event, or whatnot. Rather than trying to put one big dome over everything in the way we might have done in the days of a Civil War or a Secret Invasion, simply because we recognize that it's harder for the audience to go on that journey with us now.
Right.
Um, but that doesn't mean tomorrow we won't turn around and have a great idea for one of those and go, that's what we'll do next year. Because you're always constantly having to switch things up as well and not take the same approach time and again. For all that people I've been saying for years that like, oh, we're really, we're evented out. It doesn't seem to have been hurting DC these last couple of months to be doing DCKO. Um,
Mhm.
and nobody's really bitching about that because there's something about what they're doing in that story that people are liking, and whether those people are buying whatever the Teen Titans tie-ins and the Superman tie-ins or whatever King Aquaman, um, or not, they're getting some experience out of that they like, and that's the potential of any event story. I think it really kind of comes down to like what's the story you're telling, and then who's involved and do people want to tie in and what kind of ideas do they have to tie in and how can they use those ideas to propel their own stuff forward.
Yeah.
um yeah.
I know I bought every single tie into Secret Invasion. Like I was broke. You guys made me broke so much from Secret Invasion. Like,
Well,
I have every tie.
I appreciate you, sir. Thank you very much.
All right, I'm going to ask you an Avengers question just because I want Ken to have a nice minute-long clip to throw up on the Avengers Forever website. Um, what is your favorite era of the Avengers?
Well, my favorite era of Avengers is probably when I started reading Avengers, which I think is most people's answer when you get down to that.
Uh-huh.
And I started, in the mid '70s. So the first Avengers book that I read was Avengers 1. I read it in a copy of Son of Origins of Marvel Comics that I got from my local public library. And from that issue, that volume, I then went out to my local 7-Eleven and started picking up new books. And so when I started reading Avengers, it was, Jim Shooter was writing it and George Perez was drawing it, and we were just getting into the Korvac saga. And so the Avengers of that period, immediately before that and immediately after that, that kind of span of 40 or 50 issues is probably my Avengers sweet spot. As a fan, as a reader.
Hmm. Well, that's one of my favorite of it. That's a Beast and Wonder Man. That's like if
Yep,
Beast and Wonder Man is
yep,
on my team, then I'm
yep.
happy. um, so okay, what was your greatest influence in comics? I'm speaking kind of like editorially, right? I mean, you mentioned earlier that you ever go to the Mark Gruenwald assistant editors classes?
Yes,
Uh,
yeah. I was there for the last bunch of years. Yeah, while he had them, while he was around doing them, and I was on staff. I was going to them. Yes.
I heard about those editorial classes from Kat Schuler, and she was
Uh-huh.
just she was fantastic to talk to, and was so excited to talk about how Mark wanted to bring up the next generation of
Yep.
editors. Um, is that important for you, or who were your greatest influences on what made you decide to get into editing rather than writing?
Well, let's start with that part of the question.
Sure.
I started reading comics, when I was 6. And fell in love with them and fell in love with the medium and such, and figured that was what I was going to do. As a student, I was an illustration major. I was an art student. And so, I came to Marvel as an intern because in your senior year at this art program, you had to do an internship in the field, and I got my internship at Marvel. Um, and in doing that internship, what I discovered, and what the people around me fortunately discovered as well, was that my particular skill set was uniquely qualified to be on the editorial side of things. Like coming into the place there, having done a lot of work for fanzines of my own creation and things of that nature. I had a whole bunch of skills that were useful as an editor or as an intern at the time. Um, and I liked it. For all that, I figure I'm going to end up, drawing comics or making my own comics, and that's going to be a thing. I'm sort of wired to want to have an actual, like a 9 to 5 regular job. I don't like a freelance existence. That feels uncertain to me. I don't like it as much. And so the idea that you would be on staff and you would be an editor and you'd be, sticking your hands elbow deep into comics every day, but you know, getting a weekly paycheck, uh, and health insurance and a 401k and all of that stuff. That was all pretty appealing to me. So I didn't set out like I'm going to become a comic book editor. I found it by doing that internship and finding it and going, walking into Marvel and kind of realizing very quickly, oh yeah, this is the place. This is home. I can live here. I can do stuff here. Um, everything thereafter was learning how to be an editor, and I would argue that I'm still learning. I know an awful lot about doing this job, more just because I'm experienced than a lot of people, but I don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. In terms of who, um, it's a long list, and it's all the great editors of the past, really. Um, some, like Mark that I worked with, some like Archie Goodwin that I never did, some like Harvey Kurtzman that go back before my time, and everybody in between. My first real boss, Bob Budiansky, taught me a lot about the nuts and bolts of editing comics. And everybody that was there, Tom DeFalco, who you mentioned was on the show before, as editor in chief, and then just as writer and as consigliere, was very helpful. All sorts of people. Mike Carlin over at DC when we would do Marvel DC crossovers. Um, and it was a little bit of everybody. And sometimes it was also people that showed what not to do, and I could learn that. That's almost just as valuable sometimes in learning what the wrong thing is as well as the right thing, and seeing people make mistakes and go, oh, I should not do that. That's bad. That's dumb. So it's a litany of folk.
Nobody does it alone, right? It takes a village to raise an editor.
Oh, oh, definitely. And again, we try to pay it forward. I don't do what Mark did because I'm not Mark, but we regularly have a weekly at Marvel, a weekly reading circle. That it's over lunchtime on Thursday afternoons, where we take typically a recent comic that we've put out, but sometimes it's comics other people have put out, and sometimes it's older books and whatnot, and we all read it and we dissect it and get into what worked, what didn't work, what could be better, how could you do this in a different way, what can you take away from this? With the understanding of next month you get another shot. So it's an informal formal teaching structure in that it's intended to be instructive, but it's not like there's a syllabus specifically. Every year, like once a year, I do give a talk about the Marvel philosophy that's now over time grown so long that it's now split between 2 sessions over 2 different weeks. One of
Wow.
which is about what's the expectation on an editor What's the job of an editor? What's that all about, philosophically for Marvel? And then one that's more on a little bit more on the nuts and bolts of the craft of editing and putting together comics and how things work, and secret important information like no more than 20 pieces of copy on a page and no more than 25 words in a balloon and things of that nature.
Where do you do that? Is that virtual or is
No,
that?
that's in the office.
Oh,
And for those are mandatory. I typically tend to do them the week of San Diego if I happen to not be going to San Diego, because that's a week when a bunch of the other high level editors are off anyway. And probably we've gotten ahead to allow that to happen. So the editorial staff and any other people from other departments that want to participate and listen in, can have that hour or 90 minutes to listen to me blather off for on all of these things for a while.
I
And
mean, if you have an opening, I can come if you want. I'll be there. Thursday. I'll make my Thursday open.
I did a version of it once. Not exactly the same. I adapted it a little bit for more mainstream consumption, but I did it once for as a Hero Initiative benefit, where I think it was at a
yeah.
Baltimore convention down at Baltimore. It was you had to make a donation of whatever it was, $10 to Hero to get in the door, and I did pretty much a version of that same talk for people. So it is possible that you may be able to get your wish if you're at the right show at the right time, um, and have the right denomination for Hero in your wallet.
Well, I would definitely be a fly on the wall in that
Mhm.
in that room for sure. Uh, I have a couple more. Oh, I wanted you to talk about your website a little bit, your blog, because I found it fascinating.
I love that. I love it.
Um, so the reason I find it fascinating is because so many people that we talk to on the show and tend to lose their fascination with comics once they learn how the sausage is made. Basically,
Mhm.
like they go from being a fan to being a professional.
Yep.
And what I've noticed on your, I don't even really want to call it a blog. It's more of like the history of Tom Brevoort and comics and how you got there and what you love. But you've never lost to me. It seems like you've never really lost that fascination with what you do,
Sure.
and your love is still as poignant. And from when I read what you put up there, it seems like you've never really lost it. You just you're just a big fan, kind of like us. And it seems
Well,
to it was very accessible.
well,
So
thank you.
you're welcome.
I Mark Grunwald used to say, like, when your hobby becomes your job, it's time to get a new hobby. And that I think that's true of a lot of people, but I'm a weirdo, so it didn't really work out that way for me. So yeah, over at that tombrevoort.com page, pretty much every weekend I'll post a couple of things that are both. I've been chronologically going through all the comics that I bought as a kid, and then I'll just a bevy of other related topics, either about old comics and the making of old comics, or weird old comics of some sort. Sometimes there'll be stuff on television or film or what have you. I do that because I like it. I do that because I'm interested in it, and I do it because I like it. I also, for a while there, a couple of years, I had the Substack newsletter where I did kind of the same thing on a weekly basis. And I
Mhm.
played with that for a couple of years, and eventually that became more of a hassle than it was worth. Which is what tends to happen. Years before that, I had a FormSpring page back when FormSpring was a thing that people could ask me questions, and I answered a lot of questions on FormSpring about, why are we doing this, or when is this character coming back, or what have you. Um, So I tend to play around with all the different media as they come up and experiment with them and try things and then eventually move on. And so that page though is kind of a clearinghouse, and there's 10 years of of stuff there. Um, if you've got an interest in any of the Marvel stuff, certainly, but also a wide bevy of DC and independent and comic history in general. There's probably something there that would appeal to you. Certainly, there's a bunch of Avengers stuff for Avengers listeners. Making of on Avengers 1 and Rob's Avengers and a bunch of the crossovers and the things of that nature. Um, but yeah, I just do it because I like doing it.
I was going down the rabbit hole on your website yesterday, and I was like, man, this guy spends all days making comics, and then he comes home and reads them and writes about them, and I was like, that is like, I would love to do that. That's a passion. I was like, you supposed
Like I
you
say,
never lost the passion. So
like I said, I was uniquely, I uniquely had exactly the right set of skills for this job. Honestly, no other applicable skills whatsoever. So it's a good thing that I've been able to make a living and make a career out of doing this, because there's not much else that I could do.
hmm. Have you ever thought of like moving to DC or anything like that? Over the last 40 years, like I
Um,
know that you do Marvel, and I mean you still read a lot of the stuff that DC's coming out with.
sure. I
So
mean, I read stuff from everybody.
yeah.
And yeah, there were points. I had conversations with people at DC at different times. Mike Carlin certainly wanted to hire me over there in the late '90s. But at the time,
Love Mike.
I was working on Avengers and Thor and Hulk, and I didn't have any reason to go, basically. And then at other periods when I did maybe have a reason to go, the opening wasn't there on their end and whatnot. And then eventually they moved to California, and I'm not moving to California anytime soon. So unless they want to pay me to work remotely, that doesn't seem like it's in the cards. I always kind of figured, abstractly, that, oh yeah, I'll probably do 20 years at Marvel and I'll do 20 years at DC, and that'll be my life. And it hasn't really worked out that way. Instead, I've done 36 years at Marvel, and I've played around with a bunch of the DC stuff on crossovers and things of that nature. Um, but it's all worked out pretty well, so I got nothing to complain about.
Just the type of job that you're going to retire from eventually, or some of these people, comic creators just never stop doing comics.
Yeah, I mean, again, you never say never. I think it's more likely, that eventually the job retires you, willingly or unwillingly, or
Right.
one day I just drop over dead and that's it. That's the end of my story. Um, again, for all that, every once in a while, you sit around and think, oh, it'd be nice. I wouldn't have to get up in early in the morning or whatnot. I wouldn't have to make my long commute. I'm also very aware that every year, pretty much virtually since I started, but certainly over the last 20 or 25, every year I throw away vacation time.
Mhm.
That I don't get anywhere near to using up my vacation days on a thing. And every once in a while, I get into a point where I go, it's a light week, for whatever reason. We're not putting out any books this week. I'm going to take next week off. I'm just going to take it off, and I'll sit around and get caught up on reading stuff or do whatever. And inevitably by Tuesday, I'm scratching the walls a little bit without something to do, and I'm checking my work email anyway, and I'm never entirely checked out. And it's just, yeah, okay, I didn't have to ride a train that morning, but it's not like I'm so unplugged from things.
Mhm.
It's a fish in water situation.
Speaking about plugged in, how plugged into the MCU is Marvel Comics in general?
Um,
And is it a synergetic relationship? or do they not really care what you guys are doing these days, or vice versa?
Oh no, it's very synergetic and it's very positive. But that having been said, like those guys do what they're doing and we do what we're doing and we keep each other up to date and informed. We have regular meetings with them, just like the editorial meetings that I mentioned earlier. And we're not like necessarily up to the minute on every single move that they're making, but we get regular downloads on what's going on there, and that stuff can inform our publishing plan. If we know that they're about to do a movie that has this character in it, we can go, well, maybe we should do something in publishing to, take advantage of the fact that a lot of people are going to be thinking about that character around that month, or what have you, and vice versa. They're always very interested in what we're doing, and they've like sort of a central story department that coordinates efforts across lines, and they're constantly reaching out to us to go, "Hey, we saw this new Daredevil book that you're doing. Could you like send us whatever you've got on that so we can see, not to say anything good, bad, or indifferent, just to have it, so it goes into their pot of here's all the stuff that we're thinking about with whatever the next thing we might want to do with Daredevil or whomever." Um, so it's a very comfortable sort of back and forth.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, that having been said, you want to know what happens in Avengers Doomsday? I don't know.
No,
That was
see,
Uh,
gonna be my
I've been
I
question,
know,
yeah.
I know bits and pieces of stuff. I'm not
Yeah,
going to tell you any of that, but I know what I need to know, and at the points that I might need to know it, I can find it out, and
yeah,
on occasion, there'll be bigger things. When they were making Fantastic Four First Steps, I went out to the set along with a bunch of our creators and other editors and things, and got like a full behind the scenes tour, and got to
wow.
hang out in the Baxter Building and walk around on Yancey Street, and
yeah.
look at and definitely not drive the Fantastic Car. Um, so there's opportunities to do things like that too. It's all one organization. It's all one company, but different divisions do different things. The difference between like what Studios does and what I do. We'll keep it to Avengers for this example. Is they do one Avengers story every 3 years or 2 years, maybe 2 years if it happens to be really going. And I do at least 24 Avengers stories every year. So
Right.
my churn as a monthly publisher is a lot greater and a lot faster, and we're generating a lot more story material, story ideas than they ever can need or use. And what they basically do is we pump out huge amounts of stuff, and then they dissect it and feed through it and pull out the bits that they're attracted to and connect them in ways that make sense for what they're doing. And, that often what they're doing has an impact and an influence on our creators, we're all fans of the stuff as well. So, we go out and see an Avengers movie and people suddenly want to draw that version of Avengers Tower or whatever, or that version of a Quinjet, because they've seen it and they love it. And so it's very much a synergistic back and forth kind of a thing. But generally speaking, studios is studios, and Marvel Comics is Marvel Comics.
Yeah, we had Jim Zub. He was one of our first interviews, and he shared a story with you. And as soon as he shared that story, I'm like, I have to get Tom Brevoort on the show. Like he said, it was Jim, Mark Wade, and Al Ewing, and Alana Smith was in the room, and Jim was like, they're pitching about No Road Home. And
Mhm.
they were like, "Oh, just get rid of the Black Order." And Jim said, "You slammed your hand on the desk," and he was like, "No, the Black Order stays." And he was like, Mark Wade looked at you, was like, "They're in the movie, aren't they?" Like that was then. I was like, I got to get Tom on the
Yep,
show, man. I got to get
yep,
Tom on the
yep,
show. Yeah,
yep. Well, that again, that's one of those, we know something, and I can't even necessarily tell it to those creators, but Yeah, the Black Order were in that movie, weren't they? So it was good. It was good that we kept them in that Avengers Weekly. Um, but yeah, exactly. Like I knew what at least that piece of what was going on there, and that influenced us or me in going, yeah, we definitely want to have the Black Order in this story. It's not a coincidence that I've guided us to this point. And if we're now backing away from them, there's a really good reason to keep them there. I can't really tell you what it is, but let's do it.
That's that I love that story. When I knew you were going to bring that up
It's the most
when you said it.
fantastic story, man.
Um, so keep it on the MCU for a minute. When you have when you're revamping characters, or if you're steering stories towards like a summer event or anything, is there any thoughts of like making characters more I don't know, what would be palatable, say, for like the Disney audience or something like that? Or does that something that's never even comes through your mind?
That's not really a thing. I mean,
No.
everybody in Marvel Studios and publishing alike are kind of united on one idea, and that idea is because Marvel Comics is what it is, we're the tip of the spear, which is to say, it doesn't do the film and the television and the animation and the other lines of business any good for us to just be regurgitating the stuff that they're already doing. What we should be doing is pushing out forward in front of everything else and finding the stories that will become the stories that they will tell 2 years from now, or 4 years from now, or 6 years from now. Like we have to do Civil War so they can do Civil War. We have to do the Winter Soldier so they can do the Winter Soldier. And what we should be doing is that. What we should be doing is leading the march in whatever direction. As I say, it is synergistic. And so there's stuff that they do just by virtue of the fact that they do it, and it becomes, so prevalent and visible to our creators as much as anything else. That ends up getting sort of retro reflected back into the books. Like the most obvious example of that is absolutely nobody ever said you need to have Tony Stark sound like Robert Downey Jr. But as soon as that first Iron Man movie came out, nobody could hear any other voice in their head. And so naturally, everybody started writing Tony Stark more like Robert Downey Jr. And I don't know that anybody completely captures Downey in their Marvel comics, because there's so much of that that's about him and his performance and his personality and his whatever, but it's an influence, and it's there. Like you could see there's a definite difference in Tony Stark's, the way he carries himself, his language, his verbiage, pre-Iron Man movie and post-Iron Man movie. And that's not somebody saying you have to do this. This is just everybody went and saw that movie and that's the guy. That's what this is. And that's what it becomes. In a large part, as people write Captain America these days, they hear Chris Evans in their head.
Mhm.
And to some degree, not 100%, but to some degree, when they're writing Thor, they're hearing Chris Hemsworth's voice. It's difficult to get away from. Those guys have been those characters for a decade and a half.
Mhm.
But again, going back to the other point, it really is about not about us making things, like nobody's ever said make stuff more cuddly. That's not why Disney bought Marvel. Disney bought Marvel because they didn't have what we did. That there's a specific thing that was Marvel that appeals to our hardcore audience, and they didn't have a thing like that, and that's what they wanted. Buying Marvel and going, let's make you like all the stuff that we've already got, doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's the same kind of way that you buy Pixar, you want Pixar to do Pixar movies. You don't want them to do Disney movies. And it's not like a Pixar movie and a Disney animation movie is so different, but there's definitely something to that ethos and the way those guys put those films together, and what drives it, that's identifiable as the particular quality of a Pixar film, or a Star Wars film or whatever. Everybody wants Marvel to be Marvel and be the best, most exciting, most profitable, most forward-thinking Marvel that it can be. So yeah, nobody's asking us to cutesy anything up.
Do you think Marvel Comics and the MCU will collaborate together and create like a hero that would appear first, say in the movies or in the um before the comics, and then kind of
There've
maybe try to inject like a some kind of energy there?
there've been I mean, there've been a couple of little things like that. There was a character that appeared in What If, and I'm blanking on her name, who appeared there first and then ended up, we did a version of her in the comics.
Uh,
You know, going back further,
yeah,
pre Marvel Cinematic Universe.
like Phil
Um,
Coulson.
yeah, Phil Coulson for sure. But
Yeah.
X-23 came out of the X-Men Evolution cartoon. She was
Oh.
introduced. She was introduced there, and then she got brought into the Marvel Universe proper, starting in NYX, and then later, New X-Men and all of that stuff. So we've done that sort of thing, a couple of times over the years. It's just that, by and large, every once in a while they come up with something that is brand new or that is so significantly different than our version that we do integrate it. And sometimes, it's about squaring the circle. Their version of Star Lord was a bit different than the version of Star Lord that we'd had up to that point. That a lot of which just comes down to Chris Pratt. But it didn't.
Mhm.
Again, there wasn't a lot of we have to make Star Lord more like Chris Pratt. Anybody that went to see that film came out writing Star Lord more like Chris Pratt because
Yeah.
it was just natural. So I would say, the answer there is yes, but that's not really most of what they're doing. Like they have so much material from Marvel, long term and short term. They've done 4 Avengers movies and they're planning 2 more. There are 65 years of Avengers comics. They could make movies for decades and never run out of material and never have to innovate something completely new. Um, every once in a while, there's something that they do because they have a Jones or they see a need, but it's past a certain point, it's like why reinvent that wheel? We have a whole mountain of wheels over here. There's a lot of good wheels of different sizes, and if you can find the right one, even if you have to change it a little bit to work within the structure you've set up as opposed to what we've done, that's a time tested wheel you got there.
So Avengers Armageddon in theaters in 2029?
I I can certainly not say that. Um, or anything like it. But again, if we do our job right, and if Avengers Armageddon is a big deal thing, and it's a story that catches the zeitgeist and has resonance, then like a Civil War, like a Winter Soldier, like a Secret Invasion, like a whatever, yeah, maybe they'll take parts of it and do it. The window between when Jonathan and those artists and I did Infinity and introduced the Black Order, and when they showed up in Avengers Infinity War was relatively short.
Mhm.
So and I don't actively think about that. I don't sit around going, what characters can we introduce next month in Fantastic Four that they can put in the movie? I'm much more about what characters are we introducing in Fantastic Four that could be cool. And if it turns out that they're going to use them in a movie or a TV show or a cartoon or something, to me that's just like gravy. That's like, oh look, that's cool. Look at that. That's neat. Here's a thing that we made up and out of nothing, and now it's a thing that millions of people around the world are going to experience. That's neat. But that's not the goal. My goal is I got to sell Marvel Comics. I need to worry about my business and let those guys worry about their business. They don't need me to make the movies work for sure. At most, they need me to buy a ticket. Um, but I need to make the comics work.
So is that amazing seeing the things that you had a hand in creating on the screen where, you never thought you'd see? Uh,
Oh, sure, it's cool. It's
yeah.
it never stops being cool. Um, but it is very much like a bonus. It is very much gravy. And so it's sort of like, I can watch whatever. I can watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and at the end of that, there's Anthony Mackie walking around in a Captain America costume that I designed with Carlos Pacheco.
Wow.
And it's pretty damn close in that show to what
Yeah,
Carlos drew.
it is. Yeah.
So it's like, oh, look at that. That's a thing. I mean, on the other hand, the next day I got to come in and I got to make more comics. So it's not like it's not like I suddenly am in the land of milk and honey because I did a good thing once. It's all gravy. It's all fun and it's all great and I like it. But the job is still a job.
Mm. I have one more question, and then if Mike and Ken have anything to add, but my this is my final question, and what was the best executive decision you ever made? And then what was the one decision maybe you wish you'd gone the other way on?
Oi, it always sounds like such a simple question to answer, and I don't know that I have a really good answer for either. But if I stumble around long enough, something will come to mind. Um, I think maybe best decision I made. This isn't quite a decision because again, in a way, I sort of backed into it a little bit, but it worked out, so it was okay. Um, doing the Winter Soldier story, I think, is probably a good example of that.
Like bringing back Bucky?
Bringing back Bucky. The thing that people don't know about that is, uh, before I was editing Captain America, like a year before or so, it was in another editorial office, and there was another creative team, and they were looking for something to spike their book, and they were talking about let's bring back Bucky, and I fought like a demon to not have that happen. And mostly it was because I didn't think the story was any good, or I didn't think the story was
Really?
worth. I can't say any good. That's too strong. I didn't think the story was worth the end result. That like, okay, you're going to bring Bucky back and you're going to do this story, and then what? And then what? And nobody ever had a good enough answer for me in the end, and then what part of it to make me be interested in that. And so, I don't think that I, individually knocked that story down or kept it from happening, but I definitely had an impact on it, and I was certainly loud about it. Uh, and so, cut to, whatever, a year later, and I've inherited Captain America. I'm going to be editing it. Brian and Joe Quesada tell me Ed Brubaker's interested in writing Captain America. And I'm like, great. I like Ed Brubaker. He's the guy. And then Joe got this big shit-eating grin on his face. And he's like, yeah, he wants to bring back Bucky. And I went, oh, you son of a bitch. And Ed will tell you, like, I got on the phone with Ed when we started talking about all this stuff, and I said I got a lot of questions about this. If we're gonna do this, I need to understand. The biggest question is really the and then what. But even within that, I think it was a list of about somewhere between 12, a dozen, and 15 questions that all boiled down to some of it very obvious stuff, like, okay, if Bucky's alive, why is he not 80 years old? How is he valuable to us? Where's he been all this time? Why does nobody realize he's alive? How do we find him now? Why is this good? And again, the biggest one, like, you're taking away this seminal tragedy of Captain America's existence. This is the representation of the loss of those World War II years. Bucky isn't just Bucky. Bucky represents every fallen soldier who fell in a conflict that didn't come home, and the tragedy, the thing that Cap can never reclaim. And now you're giving it back to him. What am I getting back at the other side of this that's equal or better than that? And, Ed said, okay. And he went away for a week or so. And he called me back up and he got on the phone with me and he like started literally down the list of questions and answered every one of them. And we got to the end and I kind of went, okay, I guess we're doing this then. And we started and we did that story, and it worked out all right. Like people dug it. Some people were outraged. Certainly there was when we started, it started to bubble up that it might be Bucky. People were really on edge, but people liked the story and people liked the character and liked the journey that Bucky Barnes went on from Winter Soldier to being back to kind of being himself to being Captain America to um and then on the other side of it, it became a bunch of movies and a bunch of TV shows and things. So clearly, we didn't do too bad in making that thing work. Um, but going ahead and doing that, like that's the best example of that, and that really is all down to like I can't really take any credit for any of that. That's down to Ed. And certainly, Steve
Well,
Epting and Michael Lark and the artists who did it, but Ed in particular, listening to all of my concerns and going away and finding answers to all of them that I couldn't say no to. So he had it. He had a story. It worked, and we did it. And that's why I like to tell people my different writers and my various editors and things. If I'm not convinced, it's because you haven't convinced me. Which is my shorthand way of saying I like to think, I like to at least pretend that I can be convinced of something that I don't want to do if you can make me a good enough argument as to why doing it is the right thing to do. And that Winter Soldier story is kind of the poster child for that kind of thing. I wasn't sitting around going, I want to bring Bucky back. I was sitting around going, we shouldn't bring Bucky back.
Well, you were the final obstacle to that story, so I would take tons of credit. I mean, you were the one that greenlit it,
Mhm.
and that has turned into that's my favorite MCU movie, by the way. I mean,
I I
hands
I
down.
I agree with that. Like, I think there are a lot of really good MCU movies, but
Mhm.
I think the best film, pound for pound, that they've ever done so
Yep.
far, at least, is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. I think that's a great movie.
Yeah, agreed.
I would
Top of my list.
I could take that movie out of the MCU and put it up against any
Yep.
Hollywood movie that has come out, and I
There's
would.
one scene in it. I'm gonna ruin this for everybody now. There's one scene in it that I don't know what happens in the scene. And I've seen the movie a bunch of times over the years. And the reason I don't know what happens in the scene is because it's the scene that Ed makes his cameo in. Ed Brubaker's in the movie. Um,
Oh,
there's a scene where it's about halfway, 2/3 of the thing through. They've got the Winter Soldier back at base and they're reprogramming him, and Robert Redford walks in and is talking to the scientists that are there running the program, and Ed is there as one of the scientists. And every time I watch that scene, all I'm looking at is Ed, because Ed's like a writer. He's happy to be there, but like he's not an actor, and he's clearly standing there thinking, what do I do with my hands? Can I put them over here, or should I? And I don't know a word that Redford says in that scene. I don't know what's happening. All I focus on every time I watch that movie is Ed being uncomfortable. Uh, Um, but he got to do it. He got to be in a scene with Robert Redford. That's pretty cool.
I know what's going on my TV
Yeah.
after the show. Okay, worst decision. Do you have a bad like something you regret or something that didn't work out the way that you planned? Maybe I
Um,
don't want to say regret because that's a bad
well,
that's a
I mean,
bad
you
connotation.
could say you could say regret. Like again,
Okay.
I'm sure that the like the landscape is littered with them. Um, the kind of things that I regret much more are things like for a period of time there when he was just getting started, Dan Mora was doing like covers and little bits of work for Marvel. And at the time, I don't think anybody completely understood or appreciated what he did. And he went over to DC and exploded, and became both an artist that draws super well and that draws a lot. Like
Hmm.
some months he's doing 2 books for them. It's crazy. And so I look at Dan Mora and go, God damn it. We had that guy and we let him go, and DC's never going to let him come back. They're
Hmm.
going to back up dump truck after dump truck of money to that guy to keep him there because he's that good. So my regrets are more on things like that, and it's sort of a no fault thing, but it's a lack of insight. It's I didn't see the thing fast enough. I didn't know that we had a great piece there that could have been doing that kind of work for us. And we just that's just the nature of things. Sometimes you don't see it until it's too late. Um, I'm trying to think if there's anything like again for me for the most part. There are things I have regrets on. Honestly, I'll give you a big regret, but I have to dance around it a little bit. Um, you know,
You can leave names out of it.
yeah, well, it's not even so much the names, but it's 20 years ago, I did JLA Avengers, JLA Avengers crossover. A project that seemingly most people in the world, not everybody loves it, but most people in the world seem to really like it. And
Mhm.
I really like it too for the first two issues. And I know that it all goes haywire halfway through the third issue. And ultimately it goes haywire because I was too slow in putting my foot down and pushing back against a situation. So I let it get to that point in trying to like those crossovers are difficult to navigate because you have twice as many people
Right.
involved. You have two companies and people on all sides, and especially on Avengers JLA, like that was my team. That was Kurt and George and Tom Smith and Richard. Like it was all my guys. It was my Avengers crew doing that book. So the DC guys, I always tried to be aware that walking in the door, they had to feel like they were the outsiders rather than on. And so I always tried not to be too heavy-handed in dealing with them. And on one particular story point, I let things go further than in retrospect, I maybe should have stopped it sooner, but it broke a little bit of our story planning in that, and I don't necessarily even want to point to what it is or anything because it doesn't bother anybody else. And if everybody else loves that thing, love it. Go do it. George and Kurt and everybody put a lot of effort and a lot of work into it. But I regret it because I know the version of it that it could have been or should have been, and I like that one better.
Huh. Okay. So no, that's an awesome story. See, it's just never thought that I would hear something like that, but I love that story. So
Mhm.
I will continue to love it and wonder
As
what could have happened.
again, as you should. And it's not like I think it's bad. I think it's good. I just know the version that it could have been would have been better.
Oh,
And that's again when going back to things I tell my younger generation of editors, like that's the yardstick that I use on a project. I
yeah.
firmly believe that no editor can make a book good. No editor can make a book good. All that an editor can do is make a book better. And so the yardstick that I tend to use when evaluating, editorial performance on a thing is about how much better did you make it rather than how good is it? Because you don't have to be a great editor to hire Ed Brubaker and Steve McNiven to do a comic. Ed and Steve know what they're doing. You can be a chowderhead and still probably have a pretty good chance of getting a really great comic out of that. But getting a comic out of guys that are not so storied, who are more raw or who are more new or untrained or whose ideas are maybe all over the place or picking the right idea out of five ideas or whatnot. Certainly I've had situations, and you have situations in this job where sometimes you get handed a project. It's not a project that you initiated. Somebody comes to you and goes, "Hey, we're doing this. It's this Wolverine story, and it's with these guys are going to do it, and it's going to come out at this time." And your job is to make the best version of that you can make. So you didn't necessarily get to pick who your talent is, or all of them, or pick even exactly what the story is that's being done. But it falls to you to then accomplish the mission of making that good. And so, I feel more highly about an editor who starts with a shitty story and gets it to be a mediocre story. I feel like that's a greater accomplishment than somebody who starts with an excellent story and makes it into a really excellent story. Because the amount of change is greater. So it's not even for me about, is it good, is it bad? The phrase I use is, can I look it in the eye? And I never like to let a book out of my office. I never like to send a book to print that I can't look in the eye. Um, And so that's the metric that I use. So there are books that I've put out that people go, I hate that book. That's the shittiest book ever. And I can think to myself, okay, you don't like it, but you have no idea what it looked like when I started. So I'm perfectly happy with this version. This is way better than what and in other cases, I'm sure there are books that might have been better if I'd never been involved, because that's the luck of the draw too. You don't always get it right. I'm not always right, but the objective, the job every time is make it better. And that's that's the thing that I use. So yeah, people can point to, oh, there
Fantastic.
was that project you did and it didn't sell that great. Yeah, okay, that's fine. But if I like it, if I think it's good, if I can look it in the eye, I did my job. I did my best. I can't always. You can do everything right in this gig and still not win, because the audience decides what it wants to read that month and what it likes and doesn't like. And even the same comic published 2 different months apart or a year apart can have a completely different reaction because the zeitgeist is different. It's all alchemy, and you develop a whole set of instincts that are about reading the tea leaves of the zeitgeist and figuring out what you think will work and what won't work, and what plays into what's popular now and what plays against what's popular now, in the hope that counter programming will somehow become the thing, and everything in between. It's a complicated a thing to navigate, and it's hard to teach. The best editors, I think, end up having or developing those instincts on their own. It's not a formula. But that's why it's hard to go, what was the worst decision, choice you ever made? I'd really need something to have gone completely boondoggled to find something like that. And I don't feel personally like I've got every fan in the world. Everybody that's listening to this is sitting around going, "What about that thing that you did that I didn't like?" And my answer in most cases is probably, well, it turns out that I actually did like that, or I could look it in the eye when I was done with it. And so, I'm sorry you didn't like it. I'm sorry you didn't care for it. That's fair. You're not wrong. You spent your time and your money. You're not wrong, but I can look it in the eye, so I'm satisfied. Next patient.
All right. Mike, did you have any questions? I know that you
Nothing major. We've covered a lot here in the last couple hours. I just was wondering, is there anything, understanding the position that you're in, is there anything you can tell us about Armageddon or the upcoming X-Men stuff?
I can I
Anything at
can
all?
I can tell you that Avengers Armageddon will be a comic that we are publishing in a few months. And in fact, your first tangible taste of it will be coming out on Comics Giveaway Day, which is exactly like Free Comic Book Day, and in fact the same date, but with a slightly different name for obscure legal reasons having to do with Diamond going out of business.
Right.
So there will be a book there. It will also feature, in addition to an Avengers Armageddon lead-in story, an X-Men lead-in story that leads into a big X-Men thing we're doing, and a little Doctor Doom thing that leads into a Doctor Doom thing I'm doing. And you can get it absolutely free at your local retailer. And when you do that, when you go there to pick up your free comic, by all means, buy something from that guy. Uh, he's got plenty of other good comics there, and he stays alive bring you your free comic next year based on you putting some coins in his cash register that day. So don't just like go scoop up your free swag and skedaddle. Find something. There's a lot of good stuff that's out there and that's available. Books that will have shipped that week, collections that will have of material that was published in years past, all sorts of merchandise and tchotchkes, depending on what shop it is and where it happens to be located. But go out, enjoy, get a free comic book, get ready for Avengers Armageddon and the other stuff that we've got coming up. Stay excited, but please, make it worth your retailer's time to be part of that whole process, and show how much you appreciate having a shop that you can get to.
Ken,
So
any questions?
This is it. So, Tom, we thank you so much for assembling with us on the Avengers Forever podcast. We thank you
Sure
so much
thing.
for coming.
Sure
So
thing.
ladies and gentlemen, um,
thank you, Tom.
Tom Brevoort, Marvel Comics.